Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the third lecture of Rest in Belief. In our previous lecture 2, we confirmed that the only master key to unlocking the apparent contradictions in the Bible is precisely rightly dividing the word of truth. Only when we divide the times and divide the recipients does God's great dispensation finally come into view. Then, throughout the 2,000 years of church history, who is the figure that unfolded this truth of dividing most excellently and clearly before the eyes of Christians worldwide? It is a name that anyone who loves the English King James Bible and studies dispensationalism cannot possibly fail to know. Today in Lecture 3, we are going to talk about the master of dispensationalism and our great spiritual predecessor, Clarence Larkin. For centuries, due to the amillennialism of the Catholic Church and fallen Protestantism, along with scholars who arbitrarily spiritualized and allegorized the Scriptures, the book of Revelation and the prophetic books of the Old Testament were shrouded in a thick fog. People had absolutely no idea about the timeline, when the rapture would take place, when the tribulation would come, and when Jesus would return to earth in his second coming. However, at the end of the 19th century, God prepared one man for the sake of the confused church. That man was Clarence Larkin. Larkin's original profession was neither a pastor nor a theologian. He was a professional mechanical draftsman who had studied mechanical engineering. He was someone who designed the frameworks of complex buildings and drew blueprints. God used this secular skill of his in a marvelous way. As Larkin read the Bible, he realized that God's dispensation was applied differently in each age. Utilizing his drafting skills, he began to draw the timeline of the entire Bible onto blueprints. The result of that labor is the greatest chart book in Christian history, published in 1918, Dispensational Truth. We at Rest in Belief sincerely respect and acknowledge the achievements of Clarence Larkin. In fact, all believers today who trust the King James Bible and study dispensationalism owe a massive debt to him. Thanks to his meticulous charts, even ordinary believers could see at a glance how the dispensation of the law differs from the dispensation of grace. They realize that the rapture meeting in the air and the second coming descending to the earth are entirely different events, and they gain the conviction to believe the book of Revelation literally, not as an allegory. The macroscopic framework he drew was close to perfection. We are indeed looking at the Bible while standing on the shoulders of this great spiritual giant. However, everyone. Clarence Larkin was a great Bible teacher who pierced through the ages, but tragically, he failed to perfectly divide the word of truth. A single fatal flaw was hidden within his blueprints. He brilliantly divided the massive ages, the law, grace, and the millennial kingdom, but he completely failed to divide the most critical transition period, the microscopic turning point, where one age crosses over into the next. Larkin believed that the Gentile Church to which we belong today fully began at Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. He lumped the entirety of the book of Acts together into a single history of the New Testament church. But if the Gentile Church truly began in Acts 2, why did Paul so obsessively seek out the Jewish synagogues, first well into the middle of Acts? Look directly at the biblical record. Acts 17:2 testifies that whenever Paul went to a new city, seeking out the synagogue rather than the Gentiles was done exactly as his manner was. Furthermore, Acts 13:46 clearly testifies, "It was necessary that the word of God should first have been spoken to you, the Jews." If the Gentile church had already begun, why did the priority of the gospel still belong to the Jews and not the Gentiles? Moreover, if it was indeed the Gentile church, why did legalistic elements, tongues, and miracles still remain so powerfully active in Paul's epistles written before Acts 28? In 1 Corinthians 14:39, Paul clearly commands the Corinthian church, "Forbid not to speak with tongues. The Jews require a sign." Yet why were tongues and miracles, the very symbols of Jewish signs, operating so actively in a place called the Gentile church, and with the apostles' explicit permission at that? Clarence Larkin's broad pen nib failed to draw out these microscopic yet massive contradictions. Larkin certainly erected the great framework of dispensationalism, but he failed to rightly divide the true identity of the church within that framework. As long as this missing puzzle piece he overlooked remains unplaced, we can never enter into the perfect mysteries of the Bible. In our next session, we will deal with Schofield and Ruckman, who are known as the successors of Larkin. We will dissect the painful reasons why we must surpass these famous scholars and ultimately advance into the deep insights of E.W. Bullinger.